instead of me calling names, would it be okay if we start at this end and introduce yourself? And we'll just go down the roll.
Okay. Victoria Meinhof, present. What else do you want to know?
If you feel like sharing anything about your attendance here today, go ahead.
Oh, just here, present.
Thank you.
Mike Nix, I'm an OBGYN.
Destiny Hooper, present.
Charlita Guillory, neonatologist.
I'm Brenda Buffington, my midwife.
Janet Dermeyer, midwife.
Lori Fremden, midwife.
Thank you to everyone. We do have quorum at this time. And let's see, and our next order of business is approval of the minutes. Laurie,
Yeah.
would you lead in that since I was not present for the last meeting?
Okay. I noticed there was a correction on that came through the email. Anything else for anybody?
Did we want to have a vote too? Did you want to, or would you rather me initiate that?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any feedback on the minutes aside from the correction that we were already notified of by email?
I move that we accept the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. All right. Our next order of business is public comment, and in keeping with our previous action, then I am going to defer that to the end of the meeting. So that continues us on with staff reports.
Good afternoon, advisory board members. My name is Leonard Rivas. I'm with the licensing division. Good to see all of you, especially you, Janet.
Hey, come on now. See how rumors get started right there.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Since our last meeting in March, we have issued 11 new licenses. We renewed 59 midwives renewals. And for the second quarter, the population was 219. I did run the population count this morning, and we're at 267. So our numbers are back up. Everyone is renewed. So that concludes my report unless you have questions. Anyone?
Was the process real smooth? Because I know in the beginning there were some glitches, so I'm assuming that those got worked out.
Yes, they did.
It went real smooth.
Right, thanks to St. Yvonne, remember?
I know. She's the bomb. We love you, Yvonne.
We have to embarrass her.
We now love you too,
Yeah.
Leonard. And again, that's how rumors get started.
Oh, okay.
I had to throw it out there.
Face turned red and everything.
Other than that, are there any questions?
Nope.
No?
That
Okay.
sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, the second is customer service statistics.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Tuan Nguyen. I am the Customer Service Manager for this program. Since our last meeting in March, we have roughly the same similar stats except for March. We had a little bit increase in the numbers due to the renewals. People had inquiries and had questions, and of course some of the issues that we heard over the phone, so we tracked it, and of course once we got it resolved, we contacted the customers back to let them know all their issues were resolved. But other than that, that's all I have for you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have for me.
What are the nature of most of the calls?
Most of the calls, well, for this particular month and all regular averages, they're usually just asking about their application statuses and renewal statuses, and of course if we have sent out their license to them and to which address and whatnot. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Feinleib with Regulatory Program Management, and you have my report in your packet. And you'll see that the second item, public outreach, is not actually correct. We planned to have staff at the conference, and as it turned out, Charlotte Melder from Enforcement was at the conference, not RPM staff. So just to let you know, when this report was prepared, we had planned to have somebody there, and that's just how it worked out. We had several different things going on that weekend. So you'll have an agenda item later for the minor revisions to the informed choice and disclosure form, so I'm not going to go into that here. Things are going well on the Phase 2 transition. We're pretty much up and running on that. So this item in the section update will probably disappear on future reports, and we'll tell you about other things we're doing. Do you have any questions?
So the health program is new. How is that going, informing the health programs? And
I think it's going pretty well. We have a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter that we send out. I don't know if any of you have signed up for that. We also have a series of training sessions that we do monthly for customer service and licensing. They're actually training and discussion. E&E staff come also to talk about education and exam issues. And we announce our topics in advance so the correct customer service and licensing folks can come. We run, we run 2 sessions so that some people can come to one and some can come to the other, and it's not nobody on the phone from that group. And then we also have PowerPoint presentations and a list of all the questions that were asked and answered posted on our internal website, so staff can access that training later. So we think it's going pretty smoothly. They can ask us for a presentation on detail on a particular license issue or renewal issue, and then we'll provide that the next month. So that's, Phase 1, Phase 2. Now we're a health licensing agency also.
that's great.
Anything else? Okay,
Thank you,
thanks.
Yvonne.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Angie Schmidt. I'm a team lead for education and examination. I believe you have in your packet a copy of the stats for the jurisprudence exam. So far this year, we have administered 57. Does anyone have any questions?
Just real quickly, you had many more licenses that were approved. The jurisprudence is not taken yearly. How does that work?
I believe it's every other renewal period, which is every 4th year.
So they shouldn't match or be close?
Correct.
Thank you.
Do we have a work group set up for education?
We do not have a date set yet, but I put out some ideas around a date, and hopefully there will be a date set soon. We have some things to talk about, so, and I'm noticing, because we don't have the NARM stats on here, like that's one thing I'd just love to see, but because it's a national examination, it's hard, so it's one of the things we can talk about, in education, how we can, how we can better track, how often that test is being given or taken or passed, or what's happening there. So it's just one of the many things we need to work on to, I think, bring Texas up to a national standard. I think that's what we need to be working on in that group.
And Mary Winston, TDLR, that was Victoria Meinhardt.
Oh, sorry.
Remind you to just introduce yourselves. And we
Yes, ma'am.
had a meeting last week, and I literally got an email from upstairs saying, we can't hear the panel, so just make sure we speak into the microphone. I was impressed that they were watching, so make sure they can hear us.
All right.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Angie.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Tanya Guthrow. I'm the director of the Field Inspections Division. And with TDLR's recent recalibration, the inspection for midwifery schools has been moved from the Exams and Education Division to our division, along with all the other schools. So I thought I'd just come and introduce myself. As we know, there's not a whole lot of them. But I wanted you to know that we're here, and when there is something for us to report and provide information to you, we'll be here to, jump in and give you a report. The Field Inspections Division is broken down into 3 regions, and we have got a North Region office based out of the Fort Worth, and we've got our South Region based here in Austin, and the East Region is based in Houston. So we actually have an office in Houston and one in Fort Worth. But as you can imagine, we have split the state up into basically 3 big pies. And we have inspectors, most of them work from their home, and they do a variety of different kinds of inspections, probably for this program though, because it's such a small one. We're not going to worry about training a whole bunch of people. We'll only have a select few who are going to perform this type of inspection. We also have a support and training analytics team. This is a team of folks who look at our data and our stats, the number of inspections we've completed. They provide support for the inspectors as when they're out in the field doing their inspections, and provide information, make sure their technology is working and that sort of thing. As you can see, we've got a list of all the different programs that we inspect, and we've added midwifery to that. And this is, of course, very different than most of the inspections we do. We usually do a periodic inspection once every 2 years. Then we have a couple of pre-license inspections, but we're going to work with staff from Exams and Education and our regulatory program management to go ahead and document the procedures for when we do have schools to inspect and what that process is. Make sure it's standard, it's written down, and it's something that we can all, follow along and use when it is needed. And when we have a draft of that, we'll be coming and working with the advisory board with a work group and making sure that we're, not straying too far from the process that works with the law and the rules and the safety. And we have here just a list of some of the division updates with personnel. We moved the school inspectors from the Exams and Education Division. There's 5 folks: Lance Caroland, Amy Henshaw, Delinda Jew, Roy Cantu, and Ramon Rodriguez. And so now they're just under our division. They're, of course, still working all across the state. We recently also hired Sharon Hollins, and she's based in the DFW area. And I'm sad to say we're losing our South Region manager, Jennifer Harless. She was recently selected to be TDLR's first Strategic Response Coordinator. So we will be interviewing later this week to hire a new South Region manager. And that's really all we have to report today, but does anyone have any questions?
Charlita.
Go ahead.
Charlita Guillory. Just real quickly, you will be doing a field inspection of the midwifery schools in Texas, and you're looking specifically at education, the people who are teaching, the courses that are being taught, and then they pass whatever that you're going to tell us about later. Is that correct? Right.
One of the things we're going to be doing is documenting what those procedures are, both broadly and in more specifics. I know that they already have quite a bit of documentation that we are moving over here, but we need to review the procedures that existed at DSHS and make sure that they're still working, over here at TDLR. As you know, though, that these are not on the same kinds of schedules of the vast majority of our other programs. But for instance, when you get your provisional license, we need to go out there after the process has begun in order to, make sure that the different things are being taught the way that they need to be done before we actually issue a full-on license. So.
And there's 2 schools, right?
There are 2 schools, and
Yeah.
we have 1 provisional license.
Oh, okay, for a 3rd.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're on a time clock. Any other questions?
Victoria Meinhardt, you said you're going to be working with Exams and Education to,
Yes.
I guess, get sort of trained on how to examine midwifery schooling because it's so different than
Yes.
anything else that you're probably working with.
Not only exams in education, but the regulatory program management, which is code for Avon.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because I mean, having been through that process of,
That was Saint Yvonne.
yeah, because it's not, it's not like you're going to, it's not
No.
a bachelor's degree in midwifery.
Right.
Right. So,
Right.
it's workshops and then it's an apprenticeship and, it's a very unique
Yes.
path of education.
Yes.
So are you trying to find somebody who's just like a specialist in midwifery to do that specific work in examining the
Well,
schools?
we're going to have to not only identify the exact need that we have, I realize that we are going to have experts in midwifery to come with us to make sure things are going the way they need to. But we also need to coordinate with our general counsel's office and our contract folks about how do we do that to make sure we're in line with all of the requirements of the agency if we reach out to somebody who is an expert outside of the agency.
Okay. All right. I'll be interested to see how it goes forward. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm Karen Cox, and with me is Charlotte Melder, and we are collectively going to give the enforcement report. My part of the report is key statistics, and they are very little changed since the March report. In fiscal 2018, which began in September 1, we've opened 7 cases in this program, resolved 5, 1 with an agreed order, and assessed a penalty of $500. May I answer any questions about that part of it?
Okay, my turn. Charlotte Melder. And the section that I'm going to cover is the overview of the complaint resolution process. This was asked at the last advisory board meeting, so I wanted to walk everybody through kind of how a complaint goes here at TDLR. So a complaint can come in many different forms. There can be an online complaint filed. It can be emailed. It can be mailed. However it comes in, it is going into our intake division, our intake section. Within enforcement, we have 3 different sections. There's intake, investigations, and then prosecution. So intake gets every one of those complaints. They enter everything into our case management system. It's called legal files. And that is then assigned to a legal assistant in intake. They are tasked with determining whether or not we have legal jurisdiction over the complaint made. So for example, if somebody complains, my midwife was mean to me, if that's not a violation of our law or rules that we have jurisdiction over, that case would not be opened in our system. It would be closed out as lack of jurisdiction for not alleging a violation that we have jurisdiction over. If, however, there is at least an allegation of something we have jurisdiction over, whether there's evidence of it or not, that case is opened. Usually the intake individual will go talk to Karen or Virginia, the 2 women who work this program, and make that determination. Sometimes there's not enough information to make that determination, and they send out what's called an RFI, a request for information. That request goes to the complainant, if there is one, and if they return the information, the case is opened. It goes to an investigator. Once an investigator in these programs, in this program specifically, gets one of these complaints, they go and talk to whoever the prosecutor is who's going to be assigned. And they will know that it'll either be Karen or Virginia. They will come up with a plan together of how to do this investigation. If it's not a standard of care and there's no expert needed, they'll just gather information, documents, etc., pass it on to our prosecutor. If it is standard of care, the way we've been doing this is advisory board members have signed up, y'all know, as experts in this program. We send you the information, you review all the documents, and send your report back to Virginia or Karen. Once they get the case in their hands, it's considered in their name at this point, they review all the information and they make a determination. If they are leaning towards closing or warning the case, they will issue a closing or warning letter. If there's insufficient evidence of a violation, like you saw in the report, they will just close the case. If, however, they are leaning towards, yes, a violation occurred, or we believe a violation occurred, traditionally in every other program, our process is to issue a notice of alleged violation, an NOAV. In this program, however, the prosecutors are calling the respondent, that's what the name of the person who is complained against, and telling them, this is where we are, this is what we think is a violation, and giving them the opportunity to talk on, and give their side of the story and provide any evidence that we haven't already gathered. At that point, although this has not happened yet, if we still believe that a violation has occurred, an NOAV will be issued, and then it will go from there. They can either request a hearing at that point, they can call in and say, yeah, you know, can I set up payments on a payment plan, reduce the penalty, that sort of thing, and of course they can. Or not respond at all, and then it would go to a default order. Do you have any questions about the process? Yes?
I do. Janet Dermeyer. So when you first explained that, you said that a request would go to the midwife asking for further information?
Not
if you don't have enough to decide whether you have a...
The complaint would go, it would go to the complainant, the person who made the complaint, if there's not enough information to allege a violation that occurred.
Okay, not the midwife.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask you, are we recruiting expert witnesses from outside this board?
There is a process that is being ramped up to have external experts that we will be able to pay.
Not
but
us, but you'll pay them, but not us.
That statute, don't get me started, I have
I
nothing
know,
to do with that.
Hey, I just asked the question, right?
I understand, it's statute, whether or not that can happen. But that process is in the works right now. It's not finalized, I don't know how it's all gonna end up.
Lori Fremgen, do we need more expert witnesses than the
Well,
5 of
this
them?
program is not the only program that has experts.
Oh.
We have the other, I think there's 4 other health-related programs that we need experts in, and in some of them, we only have one person willing to do it.
Oh, okay.
And then we also have the air conditioning, you know, so we're trying to create a process where we can pay experts to testify in cases where we need them.
I see.
I don't know if Midwives requires additional besides the board.
Okay.
I just know that this is one of the programs where we have experts that we need.
Okay, that's helpful.
So for this board, we're not recruiting outside expert
I
witnesses?
am not saying that at all. I do not know.
Well, that was my question.
And I don't know. That process is in place to put experts, an expert contract together. It is not finalized. I do not know how it's going to end up. I do not know which programs for sure will be recruited. I do believe Midwives is one of them, but I don't know for sure because we're still in the middle of that process.
I'll ask again next meeting.
Okay.
Because
hopefully-
we followed up with Lori's question about, do we need more expert witnesses outside the 5 that are already on this advisory committee?
If the process is
Since we have so
finalized by
few
then.
compliance.
Yes, if the process is finalized by then it'll probably be on the agenda and we can just report on it.
Okay.
And Mary
We'll have
Winston,
some
TDLR, it's about, Janet and everyone, getting a pool.
Mhm.
So you want a pool. There are 5, that's great. We don't have a lot of complaints at all in this program. So that pool may not consist of more, it may, but we're working on a contract, so we will have a pool. If we have a program where only one person is willing to be an expert, we need a bigger pool. You all are dropped into that pot of trying to get a pool. Not saying we're specifically looking for 10 more midwives. Your numbers really wouldn't call for that. But to have that availability, we don't know how the contract's going to look. Our general counsel's office is still working on that. And there may be other opportunities. At this point, Charlotte, being a lead prosecutor, she doesn't know. She does know that it's needed across the spectrum and that it's being worked on. So when you ask next time, hopefully she'll know.
Any questions with the enforcement report?
I do have a question, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Lori Fremgen. For the cases that are resolved, those just are resolved and no violation?
The resolved cases, there are 2 different ways of resolving a case for no violation. One is insufficient evidence, and that's if the evidence collected is just not enough to go to trial. 2 is with a warning letter, and that's if we think that there's evidence, but it's probably not good enough to prevail at a hearing.
What happened in these cases?
In these particular cases, there were insufficient evidence of a violation.
Okay. And then the one agreed order,
That's the same case we discussed the
Last
last
time.
time.
Okay.
Ruben Casillas.
Okay.
And it will stay on the report until the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, okay, okay. That's good. Okay.
Thank you for clarifying, appreciate it. All right. Next item is Executive Office Staff Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Board members, Carla James, TDLR. All of our staff have been very busy in strategic planning. We've been around the state. Some of y'all have had the chance to attend, and we thank you for that. We went to 5 different cities: Arlington, McAllen, Houston, and El Paso, and Austin. And this is a process that all state agencies are required to do every other year, which is basically tell the legislature how you're doing and what you need. And so that's what our strategic planning process is. Staff have been in many, many meetings discussing all the input. I was in a meeting earlier today where there was 1,100 alone just for legislative items. Those were just comments. So we're going through those and constructing our strategic plan, which will go to the legislature sometime this summer after our commission has approved it. And this is where we ask for changes to the law, changes to the rules, and that comes directly from the general populace. So we're excited to see what comes of that. We are fully up and running on our commission again. The governor has appointed 2 new members, Dr. Ray Callis, a anesthesiologist from Beaumont, and Dr. Gary Wesson, a retired orthodontist from the Bastrop area. So we'll be up and running. Our next commission meeting is the 24th of this month. And finally, Tamala is not going to be our advisory board person anymore. She is going to work downtown. We've sucked her into the fold downtown. So this will be her last meeting. I'm not sure which of the ladies will be assisting y'all. It'll either be Christine or Delia. They are very highly qualified, and whomever you're going to be working with, they will do as good of a job as Tamala has done. But I wanted to let you know today was her last meeting with y'all.
We'll miss you.
We're going to miss you. We like you.
And ladies, Mary Winston, so we're also going to be hiring another person to help the 2 remaining program specialists. So I'm going to ask that you be gentle at first meeting.
This
With
is
the new
Janet Dermeyer.
person.
No promises.
Well, I had to ask Janet.
I'm just kidding.
Well, I will say that I'm very protective of my staff if there's no promises. So
It's a threat.
that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Well, and Tamala, congratulations, and you will be sorely missed. Thank you.
I do have a question, Janet Dermeyer. Will we be able to see that 25-page report that was the result of the?
Oh, absolutely. Once the commission has approved it and we'll turn it in to the legislature, it goes out on our website. It goes out on the agency website. So it'll be there for everyone to read at their leisure. And I'm sure it'll be a very exciting read for people who are included with this agency, maybe not so much for the general populace. But I personally like the strategic plan, so it's exciting for me, but I'm not your average animal.
Thank you. Next is our work group reports. It looks like we've got one from the Standard of Care Work Group.
All right. Lori Fremgen. It looks like our rules, the changes we've been making to our rules, does this mean it's about ready to be published?
Well, this is Brad Bowman, General Counsel. Those rules are before you today in draft form to discuss and possibly recommend for proposal. So that
Okay.
would be the next step
Okay.
in the process, and I'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about those rules.
Okay. So, have y'all had a chance to read through the changes, or do you want to go through them one by one? I don't know what's most helpful right
I'd
now.
like to go through them.
And we'll have on item H, Madam Chair, we'll have all those rule items before you. We can go through section by section in as much detail as you all want to.
So should I save it for that agenda item?
Probably so, since we have that specifically on the agenda. for
Okay.
you.
Well, that's the only thing with the Standard of Care Work Group then. I don't think we've had another meeting since our last meeting, so.
Thank you, Lori.
All right. And item G, we have discussion of license holders, record-keeping requirements, 16 TAC 115.100C, and assignment to our work group.
Lori Fremgen, Meredith, at the last meeting, this was something I brought up about what we do with the records of deceased midwives. We don't really have any mechanism to manage that in any way. And so, so I didn't include a proposal to assign it to a work group at the meeting, so we just need to do that now.
Okay.
So.
What work group are we thinking that might be appropriate to cover? Would that be a standard of care?
Probably so.
Would that go to standard of care work group?
I think so. I don't know.
Because other record-keeping requirements are typically under standard of care.
It could be that or licensing, but,
Sure.
do we have anything else, Leonard?
They're not working on anything, so.
I know. And will this standard of care work group meet again anytime soon?
If they, Mary Winston, TDLR, if they need to meet, this is a new issue.
Yeah.
So this is something that needs to be discussed. I think, Laura, you made the request, and
Yeah.
I
Victoria-
had to read it 3 times, like, oh, that's what that is. So, yeah. Victoria?
Victoria Meinhardt. I don't know if it goes in standard of care because it's about the legal requirement to keep records for a certain amount of years. And so maybe it's more of an enforcement issue just because it's just, I mean, it's just about like what are we doing with these records? It's not about the care we provide or the definitions involving the care we provide or how we provide care. It's about these are these records. We have to hang on to them for the 18 years for the child and 5 years for the mother. What are we doing with the records from midwives who have demised? So I'm wondering if that's more of an enforcement, because like what happens with that person, what happens when a client tries to get records from somebody who has passed away?
Vicki,
So-
Mary Winston, this is more rules.
Is it rules?
It's going to be rules.
Okay.
We.
So that's
Okay.
a standard of care thing.
It is a standard of care thing?
Yeah.
It's gonna be
Okay.
rules.
All right, I guess we'll take it up then.
It's a little window that, I did what you did. Well, it's 18 years, it's 5 years, and then, oh, if someone dies, where is this? And it's not there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Laurie.
Yes.
But, it's
Yeah,
rules.
who's managing those records? Right. I really
It's
have no idea.
silent to that.
Oh, boy.
This is Charlita Guillory. As you speak about what to do with records in the case of a midwife who dies, perhaps we ought to, because this just recently came up in Houston, where there were records officially at home and flooding occurred, as well as businesses. So I think when you bring that up, we probably better talk about what happens in disasters to records.
Very good point.
Thank you.
Dr.
Janet Dermar, could that be something that would also go with licensing? So when we renew our license, it's part of that license agreement that says what our plan is as a midwife?
That is a discussion, Mary Winston, for the work group.
Okay.
Michael Nix.
That's a great thought.
This is, I'm sure this is something that's been handled before in other fields where there has been deaths. And I actually had talked with an attorney offline, asking questions, kind of what they do. And it seems like in entering into a discussion in the standards of care work group, we probably would do well having some legal consultation, having looked into what is done in other fields prior to that meeting.
This is Brad Bowman. We can work on that.
Yeah, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. We just need some guidance here on what midwives are supposed to do, what provision are they supposed to make for all those records. Yeah.
I looked on the HIPAA law and all it said was each state makes its own rules as to how to manage it, so.
That's not helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
But we definitely, Mary Winston, can go look towards different state licensing agencies to
Right.
see and their rules and how, it's not going to match up completely with midwives, but we may be able to find
You
you know, a
could jump in.
template to go from.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Would you have that, Brad, when we come to the work group meeting?
Yeah, we'll try to have that research done
Okay.
and have maybe some options. We'll see what's out there and
Okay.
maybe have some options for you to look at.
Thanks.
Even the, what the physicians have to do, I think
Well, I guess physicians are usually part of a practice, so they can
Yeah.
leave those records with that practice unless they're in private practice, and then, yeah, what do they do?
yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Okay.
It's not, certainly not the only profession that has maintenance requirements on records and has sole practitioners, so that would definitely be helpful to see what other professions require of sole practitioners. All right. Any other questions on item G?
Oh, do we need to take a vote on that?
Do we need to officially vote on that?
I don't think so. This is Brad Bowman. The appointment of a work group or assignment of topics to work groups is really within the discretion of the chair, so
Okay.
there's not
So we will
really
go
a
ahead and
vote.
assign that license holder record-keeping requirements to the standard of care group. Thank you. All right. And now looping back around, Laurie, to the discussion and proposed recommendation on the possible recommendation on proposed amendments.
Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Brad Bowman, General Counsel, and you know the person seated to my left. And we're going to walk you through the draft rule changes that are before you. And I'll just kind of give you a little overview of the process and kind of where we are in that. There are really two drivers of this this package of rule changes. There are a couple of legislative changes. House Bill 2886 and House Bill 4007 made two different changes to your statute, and we're updating the rules to reflect those changes. And those are removing the civil, criminal, and administrative penalties for a midwife for being unable to administer the eye prophylaxis if the parent or guardian objects to that. So that's already changed in statute, updating the rules to reflect that, and then that has to be documented. And then the other change, legislative change, is there. In prior statute, there was a requirement for TDLR to provide a list of licensed midwives to county clerks, and in the internet age, that's been changed to just requiring us to post a list on our website, which we do, and so we're deleting that county requirement from the rules to match what's in statute now. Those are the only two legislative changes. The other changes, as has already been mentioned, was from the work of the Standard of Care Work Group. Had a number of meetings, very productive meetings, working with staff and kind of making some tweaks and some substantive changes to the Standard of Care provisions. And so we'll just kind of go through section by section, and feel free to jump in at any time with any questions or comments, or if you want to stop and have a discussion about that. At the end of the discussion today, you could, if you're ready to move forward with this rule proposal, take a vote to recommend publishing these changes in the Texas Register. And that would be the next step in the process. And let me talk about that just a little bit. This is in a draft form today. When the agency, any state agency, changes rules, you have to go through this formal rulemaking process. The next step is to publish this in the Texas Register for a 30-day public comment period. Then the advisory board would come back at the end of that 30 days, consider all of the public comments, and then make a final recommendation to our commission. And then at the next regular meeting of our commission, the rule proposal would go to the commission for possible adoption at that time. So that's kind of a quick overview of that process. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Charlita Guillory, just a question. I know it's legal and it's very simple for you guys, but if you're changing rules, you did it in statute, you did it as a result of the legislative changes. And now we're doing it as a result of the board. So the board has a right to bring up rules that can be published. We can vote on that. We have that right to change rules.
Well, the advisory board's role is to recommend rule changes to our commission. The commission has the ultimate authority to adopt the rules or to adopt the rule changes. They rely very heavily, the commission relies very heavily on your advice and recommendations and your input. So what you do here today is going to have a lot of influence over what the commission ultimately decides in adopting this rule package.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Janet Dermeyer, we've been told for years that we really can't make rule changes unless it's a legislative year. So is that not correct? We can make those changes when it's not a legislative year?
Yeah, there's really no, limit in terms of that. I think most rules are driven by statutory changes, legislative changes, and so you tend to see those rule changes coming about after the end of the legislative session. And we're doing some of that here, but there's not an absolute limit on that. You can open rules for discussion and possible changes at any point.
Victoria Meinhardt, we did open up those rules last year, though, when the legislature was in session, right? After that statute, because we've been meeting now for a while.
I think there's some confusion around the idea of when the rules are open and closed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Maybe I can do a better job of explaining the process. So the process that we've gone through to get to this point has really been discussing a draft, kind of looking at the current rules and marking them up and doing some editing and going through and deciding what we might want to change. The formal rulemaking process really starts after today. If you approve of these changes, that would be then that draft would be published to the world as a proposal to change the rules that the public could then comment on, and then that kind of goes through that formal process.
I suspect, if I can just add part of the confusion, maybe when we were at dishes, it was kind of a vulnerable place for the board to be in, to open up the rules and make changes and discuss them, because it opened it up to a lot of public comment and scrutiny. And so I think maybe some of that is kind of carrying over here a little bit. So we tried to open them as little as possible. Does that make sense?
It does,
Okay.
and that's just something to consider in deciding whether to go forward with rule changes, I guess. But it's a discretionary thing. It's not. There's not a limit on when you can do that.
Yeah, we can address rules at any
point.
time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a little about the process. I guess we can get back to the draft and kind of walk through. And I'm just going to go section by section, and we're here to try to answer any questions and then open it up to any discussion for
Can I
y'all.
say one thing at the beginning? You'll notice we have a repeal, and we took the language out of that section on how different professionals coordinate care together, and we split it up into other sections. So you'll see pieces of that language in the definitions as Brad starts going through, and you'll see it other places in the rules. So that repealed section didn't go away, it just got reorganized. And we tried to clarify the wording to make it workable for enforcement. So you'll see a lot of changes from passive to active voice.
Workable for enforcement and midwives.
And midwives, yes.
And that leads right into 115.1, which is the definition section. And as Yvonne was saying, the work group took some language that was in 115, or is currently in 115.111, and took those terms. And if you look, as you're going through this draft, new language is underlined, and language that's proposed to be taken out of the rules is stricken through. So just so you know there. So this underlined language, these definitions that are added, they're not really new. They're coming from this other place in the rules. They're just being moved there because they're definitions. And as Yvonne was saying, we want to put the definitions in the definition section, and then the operative provisions and requirements of the rules are later on. So that's the reason for that.
Can I also add one thing, too, before we start? With these definitions of collaboration, consultation, and referral and transfer, we were working with Dr. Nix on this to make sure that the language that we use is the same as what doctors or hospitals would use. I think we were using kind of two different languages, and this helps the communication be smoother.
Any questions or discussion about those definitions? Move on to 115.70, Standards of Conduct. And I believe this was a product of some work group discussion, adding in, well, first of all, in M, striking the word demonstrated, and then adding in N, O, P, and Q. Any questions or comments about that?
Sorry, this is Brenda Buffington. Can we go back up to the definitions for a minute?
Yes.
On the definition of a retired midwife, I'd like to maybe change that wording somewhat. No, I can't find it. It says, not currently employed in a healthcare field. A retired midwife might choose to have a job somewhere, and if it's working in a doctor's office or working in maybe she wants to be a dietitian, you know, how can you tell someone they cannot work in a healthcare profession?
Now, I would say this is not a definition that the work group discussed changing, so that's a good thought, and I might suggest, is this something you want to address now, or do you want to have the work group kind of take a look at
Can I
that?
ask the work group to look at it again?
I would actually like to recommend that maybe the work group look at it for the next
Okay.
round, and that this move forward,
Okay.
hopefully as is.
Right, there's a provision that requires this type of a rule, and so we'd have to look at that particular law before we decided to change this. We couldn't just do this on the fly.
But you make a good point, Brenda. I keep little notes of what we discuss in our work groups,
I mean,
so.
you know, you can be 55 and retire as a
Yeah.
midwife and do something else.
Yeah,
Really?
it's really true.
I have a question about definitions as well, Janet Dermeyer. 22, the transfer is about transfer. I have a question about when we call 911 and actually send a client by ambulance. Are we transferring care legally then? Because it's my understanding that an ambulance is just transport, not really transfer of care. Or do we, because there's some confusion there that if we're going to transport and we're not transferring care until we get to a physician or a hospital, then we should be riding in the ambulance with them to continue care.
Providing care.
Because we know what to do, and often EMTs and paramedics aren't really, they're trained in how to deliver babies if they're coming so fast you can't get to the hospital. But they're often not really trained with complications, and we know how to manage those complications until we transfer. And I don't want to transfer care of one of my clients to an EMT or a volunteer ambulance maybe service. So
If you look at the language in the transfer section further on, it does actually say you stop providing care unless they ask you to.
Yvonne, I'm sorry, could you speak into the microphone, because I don't think anybody but me can hear you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
If you look further on in the rules under emergency transfer, it does actually say you stop providing care unless they ask for your help,
Yeah,
Who asks
Victoria
for your-
Meinhardt,
Who
that's,
asks for your help?
the EMTs. So this has to be read in conjunction with that.
And, yeah, if you flip over to 115.113, transfer of care in emergency situation. I think that's the section that Yvonne is referring to. It's B, and this is, the language is underlined, so this is language that the work group worked on to add to the rules. And the last sentence, the midwife shall not provide any further care after the arrival of first responders unless requested by first responders.
It was my understanding that that was only if the client had refused transfer.
Yeah, Janet Dermeyer, there is
That's
a little-
correct.
a
That's
little bit of
correct.
confusion there. Because I think when we addressed this, a lot of the discussion was based on when a midwife has a serious situation and she wants to transfer care, and the client is saying, I don't want to go to the hospital, and we know that that's where she needs to go, and we call 911, what do we do if they refuse, because we can't abandon their care either? And so that was kind of a way that we could not abandon care, we're actually transferring care in that situation. But I have some concerns about a situation where we might have I'm going to make something up, like a prolapse cord, where we know how to handle prolapse cords to save the baby's life. But EMTs typically aren't really trained to do that. So we really need to be ever present in that care.
We can't write rules that will force
Yeah.
licensees
Right.
of another entity, like an ambulance service, to allow us to do things if it goes against their protocols under their position.
That's kind of a scary thing, because you'll find more midwives transferring by their own private car.
Well, not necessarily, I mean,
It would help me to make that determination if I have a prolapse cord, because I know that they're not really trained to handle that. Or even a postpartum hemorrhage.
Victoria
Well,
Meinhardt, my understanding is when you call 911 and those guys show up, we legally have relinquished care to them, whether we like it or not. Like, that is the legal thing. And, it does put midwives in unfortunate situations in cities or towns where your first responders are not privy to what we do. The best I can say to that is that the midwives in those cities need to gather up their EMS personnel and have meetings and get them educated, as we've done here in Austin. And that is how you help EMTs understand that you need to be riding in that truck with them. But legally, when they show up, we have relinquished care, which protects the home birth midwife who is dealing with a client who is refusing transport in a dangerous situation. Then the midwife can say, I've called 911, I am no longer responsible for you, you will go in the ambulance, and that is what has to happen. So I understand that there's some concern, but at the same time, we can't change what the rules and statutes are surrounding what kind of, when we call 911, we really are saying, here is this client, take her to the hospital, and we are relinquishing care in that moment. That is what we're doing legally. So, I don't know if there's any way to really change that to satisfy those types of concerns, except to work locally with your EMS providers.
The San Antonio Midwives Association is doing that.
Awesome.
And we've had paramedics and EMTs tell us that they get really irritated when we talk about transferring our clients to them, because they consider themselves just transport.
yeah, it's a little bit of a
Process.
turf war.
We're working on it, but.
Yeah, I know. It's a little bit of a turf war in the ambulance because they're responsible.
Yes.
And we still feel responsible. So
Right.
somehow it's a situation where we all have to work together. I've been asked to come in ambulances and I've been asked to not.
Yep.
It's gone both ways here.
Charlita Guillory,
Me
and I
too.
have a quick question. Can you tell me who is responsible for the EMS people? Who, do they answer to anyone? Someone has to be legally responsible for them. Do they answer to themselves only?
They're
or do
under
they
a
have
medical director.
physician?
They have a physician.
Do they have a board?
They have a physician, that's what I thought.
Do they have a board that we can work with?
There's usually a captain that rules over the division, and if you get in touch with the captain of your local EMS, a lot of times they'll come and help you resolve
No,
problems.
not in San Antonio, they won't talk to us. Do they have a state board?
Members
They
Carla
don't have a
James,
licensing
TDLR.
board. They do
Yeah.
have a DSHS
Right,
licensing
they have a licensing
program.
board, but they work closely with the local entities. I will tell you, I don't think we know definitively who that is. I think they may say grace to several people, but,
I mean, if this isn't, I'm sorry, Charlita, do you want to go ahead?
The only thing, Charlita Guillory, the only thing I want to say is I do work with transports of neonates quite a bit, and it's a big deal of transferring the service to the person who's picking up the baby. So for us, picking up a baby in transport, once we take the baby, we have a system. There's a doctor there that is responsible, and because we're told not to leave unless we know we can handle the situation. So there is a doctor behind the transport team, and I'm thinking that's what's happening here. And they're responsible once you leave the site.
That's right.
So
What they do for
can I,
neonates.
maybe Janet, can I make a suggestion that maybe you and I go to one of your board meetings and make a public comment? And ask to work
Absolutely.
with them or something
Yeah.
like that?
Absolutely.
Can you maybe
Yeah.
do that? Okay, that might be helpful, to open up a dialogue around that.
Yeah,
And-
it's been helpful here in Austin, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
I
sure.
know other cities are different, but it has been helpful here.
And remember, this definition of transfer is for all transfers, including when you're transferring care during prenatal care and they have a certain amount of time where they're in your care to find another provider. So this is not just emergency transfer. So it has to be written broadly.
True that.
Okay, I'm going to move on to 115.100, standards for the practice of midwifery in Texas. So subsection A is the first change, and that, I think that sentence is deleted because it's not really a rule, it's not an enforceable requirement, which I think was the discussion around that. In paragraph 2, adding in the requirement to document. In 4, we're updating the reference to the core competencies for basic midwifery practice to the, as I understand it, the most current edition, December 2014. And there's a change in subsection C to just rewording this to make it more in the, as Yvonne was saying earlier, in the active voice. It's clear that's a requirement of the midwife to document. And the same in subsection D. Any questions, comments about any of that? 115.111, I'm just going to keep moving on unless, feel free to interrupt me, but I'm,
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Janet Jermeyer. On D, on number 1, collect client data systematically and be involved in analysis of that, involved with whom? Can you just kind of describe that a little bit?
Well, that's part of our old rules, that hasn't changed at all. That's gonna be
I know,
for
but
a while,
I'd like to know what that looks like.
Okay.
I mean, review problems identified by the midwife or by other professions or consumers in the community? And who do you do that with? Is there, what is that actually tangibly?
Well, I think, I mean, when I read this, there's 2 ways to address those 2 things. Collect client care data could be done with, like, for example, manistats. And we played with the idea of requiring midwives to file manistats, but decided against it. But yeah, but that, I mean, it was part of the discussion, but that's one way that people can participate in collecting their data. And then reviewing problems, again, that can be, like peer review. And again, we played with the idea of making mandatory peer review, and decided to not make that change at this time, but it was also part of the discussion. So those are two ways that you can participate in reviewing problems or collecting the data. And then I guess, each midwife can collect her own data, and review it and analyze it. I'm pretty sure the birth center does that. Don't y'all do that, Vicki, each year?
Yes, Victoria Meinhardt. We put our stats in the perinatal data registry. We also have a process by which we do chart review in every monthly meeting where we look at every single transfer, every single transport, every single problem client. We also have a process by which we do root cause analysis when we have an outcome that's less than desirable, and that usually falls to the clinical directors, where we go through and examine that case very clearly and then create a report on the case, and then present that report to the staff. So, because we're a bigger group, we have that opportunity. But I think in a private home birth practice, the community by which you go through peer review, you can do that process. And I know some other practices do keep their stats or go back every year and look and see, okay, how many C-sections, how many transfers, how many successful vaginal deliveries, how many postpartum hemorrhage. And it's a valuable process by which you can create improvement in your practice. So I feel like it's appropriate to be in the rules because it does allow that self-reflection that's necessary for improvement.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, 115.111, as we talked about earlier, the current .111 is being repealed, and then we're moving those terms into the definition section that we've already talked about. So this is kind of a rewriting of that. I did want to point out one thing. Subsection C is the legislative change regarding the eye prophylaxis.
That references it, but it actually is also about standing orders, which came from another section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Charlita Guillory, does that include like a hepatitis vaccine?
Midwives don't have authority to vaccinate.
Just
why this changing notice, it has to be the client 30 days to 15. I think that was a change that was discussed in the work group.
We really worked hard trying to clean up this section and close a couple of loopholes and make it a little bit more user-friendly all the way around.
Yeah, one of the Victoria Meinhardt, one of the problems we were trying to address is like somebody who's, we're choosing to transfer them out of care, but then they have 30 days where they're with us, but they're not with us. And, it creates this sort of situation where the midwife can be legally in trouble when they've already informed this client that, they're out of our care for the reasons stated. And if that client chooses to go off on her own and have her own, unassisted experience, it's not really fair to hold a midwife responsible when she has laid out very clearly the reasons for that transfer out of care. So that's why we reduced that from 30 days to 14 days.
Well, it also protects the client, because if you don't belong in midwifery care, it's
That's
better
right.
to have that shorter period, and then you're in the care of somebody who can take care of you, rather than thinking, well, I've got a whole month, it must not be that serious.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So both ways get patients to physicians sooner than later. We really need it.
And I'm just hitting some highlights in each section. I'm not covering every single change in the section, but anything you all see that you want to talk about, let us know. And 115.113, that's the provision we've kind of talked about a little bit already for emergency transfer.
Can I say just one little thing about emergency, because I think probably some midwives across the state are going to have questions about this. We decided to call a transfer that's happening during labor and delivery an emergency, regardless of whether or not it's something we
Urgent,
deem
yeah.
as an urgent emergency, like failure to progress, for example.
Life-threatening.
Yeah, so, and that just helps to encompass anything that comes up in labor and delivery in this rule. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something we determine as an official urgent emergency, but it does fall in the emergency provision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
perfect sense.
Okay.
Because emergency transfer means things could happen at any minute, and I want to do it before that happens. For sure.
115.114, prenatal care. There's some kind of updates to this, the list in which referral is required. And that's subsection B. And then subsection C similarly is dealing with transfer and when kind of updating the list of when that is required. Subsection D.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Janet Dermeyer, did y'all determine what preterm, premature rupture membranes are? Or, I mean, that's preterm, like,
Mary Winston, Janet, I know you can. Speaking to the microphone. I heard you say something, I don't know what you said.
oh, I'm
So-
sorry. On number 12, I have a question about what is your definition of premature rupture membranes?
Preterm, premature. rupture.
Preterm.
Yeah. Dr. Nix, did we discuss that? I don't remember specifically. I mean, I'm assuming.
Mike Nix, I don't know if we discussed that specifically. I think it has a pretty, in my mind, has a standard definition. Preterm being less than 37 completed weeks of gestation, premature being onset of rupture of membranes prior to the onset of labor.
Yep, Victoria Meinhardt, my understanding is that the last time we changed the rules, we made the decision that preterm was anything before 37 weeks. So and I believe that's still in the rules and it hasn't been changed. I don't think we touched that definition at all. So that would still refer to any rupture of membranes before 37 weeks.
And just point out, we're not proposing any substantive change here. That's just a grammatical correction on that particular term. Okay.
I just want to make that
Charlita Guillory, if there's any question, could you just put it in the definition? Keep it here, but put it in as a definition.
If we need to do that, that's something we could look at adding.
Well, I think like
It's
for
in there.
things that had like standard medical definitions, we didn't
Didn't
include
have
them in
to.
the definitions. And then for ones that we had very lively debates over, we included the definition in the rule. Janet, did you have more about that?
I think bottom line, what I wanted to know basically on that is premature rupture of membranes, does that include a woman who's 38 weeks pregnant and her water ruptures and she does not have active labor?
No.
No, because
No.
the word preterm is
So
significant.
that's what I'm wanting to
Yeah.
clear, well, I just want to
Okay.
clarify, on my, you're talking about these two things together.
Yeah, yeah.
Only.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Subsection D, and I think there was discussion in the work group about what 42 weeks meant, and so that, I think that's the reason for 42.0 weeks, specifying that in the rules.
Mhm.
Okay, 115.115, labor and delivery. C is kind of reworded to make it more of an enforceable rule. I think that was the idea there. Rather than just kind of a description of what midwives do, it's a statement of the scope of a midwife's practice. And potentially if a midwife went beyond that, then that could be an enforceable rule if that became an issue. And then, and just point out in number 6, adding quite a bit of some technical language, which I'm not going to go into, but about a non-reassuring fetal heart rate.
Mike Nix.
Yeah, go ahead.
What we tried to identify there was those Category 3 tracings. It's very difficult to come up with what a non-reassuring fetal heart rate tracing is, but we wanted to clearly identify that if there is a Category 3, what we're using as definitions of Category 3 fetal heart rate tracing, it does need immediate attention. So,
Right. Yeah, we were hoping that that would bring some clarity to what that actually meant. Non-reassuring fetal heart rate.
Midwife has to actually take the heart tones too,
Yes, they have to.
on a pretty regular basis to detect those.
Correct.
Well, you can determine these, right? Yeah, okay.
Okay, 115.117, newborn care during the first 6 weeks after birth. Number 4, paragraph 4 on that list, again, some clarifying language added here to clarify what large for gestational age means in terms of when a referral is required. And I think there was quite a bit of discussion in the work group on this, and that's sort of where we landed.
yeah, do you want to, Laura, do you want to summarize this, or shall I summarize this? We finally came to a collaborative agreement on this.
Yes.
because
Yes, we did.
Large
With the
for
friendship
gestational,
intact.
large for gestational age can be greater than 90th percentile, 95th percentile, 97th percentile, but where we nailed down the 97th percentile is that's where we identify that the babies have a much larger risk for morbidity associated was after that 97th percentile. So that's where we picked that 97th percentile for gestational age. So it's just not a big baby, it's not a 4,500 gram baby, it's not a macrosomic baby, it's a baby that's greater than 97th percentile for its gestational age.
Yeah, it roughly translates to around 10-ish pounds, but it depends on the gestation. I tried, Janet. She's shaking her head ever so slightly.
That's pretty generous.
Well, first of all, I want to know, how are we supposed to determine that these babies, the size of these babies, because you get an ultrasound, and they can be wrong up to 2 pounds heavy or light?
This
is talking about
This is
after
postpartum.
baby's born.
After birth.
After they're born?
After birth.
After
You
birth.
transfer them after they're born?
That's correct.
So every baby that's born after over 10 pounds, we're supposed to transfer?
No.
We're supposed to
Recommended to-
recommend referral.
Recommending referral, not transfer.
transfer.
So you have some room there.
This actually is a little bit more generous than it was before, because before, large for gestational age is kind of traditionally determined to be in the 90th percentile. And so we, through a lot of discussion, came to 97th percentile. And 90th percentile falls somewhere right around 9-ish, high 8s, 9-ish pounds. So, and that's what was in the rules previous, so I feel like we opened it up a little bit.
Yes, we did. I'm very proud of that. That was a long conversation. We got to it, though.
This is Charlita Guillory. Just two quick questions so I'll understand the discussion. For example, if you have a baby that's, say, 10 pounds and you don't decide to transfer, or however you get I don't know how it works. But needless to say, do you check glucoses and things like that?
Well,
Because of the morbidity associated with it, how do you handle that? And then the second question, while we have it, is the Academy of Peds is now recommending you do hepatitis vaccines early. How do you send the patient for things like that?
Well, as far as
If
the
any.
first question in the glucose checks, I think probably each midwife practices differently on that. And the thing to keep in mind is that we're in the room with the baby watching constantly for 2 to 3 hours at least, if not longer. And babies show signs. So if we see signs that aren't resolved by nursing, I would think people would take further action.
Mike,
My
Mike
guess on
next.
that.
In addition, if the client declines the referral to the physician or associate's advice, the midwife shall continue, if the midwife continues to care, these are 4 different things they can do there. And this is from previously defined in section 115.111. Continue to care for the client after discussing and documenting the risks in the midwifery record. So if there's a declination, if the client decides not to accept such referral and the midwife decides to continue with taking care of that client, then there must be a documented discussion of the risk that could be associated with that. So there is some, at least some addressing of the potential issues that could arise from it.
Thank you.
And then as far as the hepatitis B, I mean, you know, we are not allowed to give vaccines. We just don't do it. I believe there is a law that says we're required to talk about vaccines, and so, or give information about it.
Normally, you know, it of course can be given at the 2-month vaccine, which is probably why you did the 6-month thing. It's just some new things, recommendations. It's going to affect us as well, and I was wondering how you were going to handle that. That's
Well,
all.
we are obligated to inform our clients about the various vaccines that are available and recommended by the CDC, not only for the baby, but for themselves, you know, so the Tdap vaccine that has to happen in the 3rd trimester, and, you know, all these different things, like flu vaccine, we have to inform them. So our job is just to let them know that these exist and that these are the recommendations, and then they need to talk to their pediatrician. And most midwives are asking clients to get a pediatrician before the baby ever delivers, so that they have that all lined up. So if they choose to do the hepatitis B vaccine, if they want to go see their pediatrician at 24 hours postpartum, they can.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a requirement in rule that the midwife and the parents make a plan for the continuing care of the newborn before the baby is born.
115.118, administration of oxygen, some reworking of these provisions. Any questions, comments about that? Dot 119 is the eye prophylaxis provision. And that brings us to the end. There are 2 deletions, which we've already touched on. 115.90 is the requirement to send the roster to counties. And then 115.111 is where we move the definitions to the definition section and then kind of rework that section in a new .111. So, any other questions, comments? I did not really hear any changes or edits as we were going through.
I did see a numbering thing. Is that going to be just or just to make sure that the numbers all match?
We will,
To the
we will
second.
continue to go through it. There's still a review process that has to go through
Okay.
before we're actually ready to file it, but if there's anything in particular that you noticed, we'd, and we
was
will,
in- I have it. Do
Okay.
you want it?
yes, please.
Okay, it's in 115.114 prenatal care, subsection C. Oh, never mind, I see 1 through 7, no change. I thought 8 should have been number 1.
Okay.
Good to
But,
clarify.
yeah, but we will go through, and if there are any grammatical or any typos or anything like that, we will try to clean those up.
Victoria
Part of the
Meinhardt, I have a
process.
question about the eye prophylaxis. So we have that we need to ensure the administration of eye prophylaxis or the objection of the parent, and it needs to be entered into the medical record of the child. We have stricken out must obtain a written exemption. So does this mean that we are now allowed to take a verbal objection and write it in the chart and do away with the waiver for ophthalmic eye prophylaxis?
That's how I read it.
That's how I read it too, but I just want to make sure before I just strike that out
This is
of.
tracking the statutory language, right?
So that's tracks the statutory language, and they're saying we no longer need a waiver that is objection of the parents. We can verbally, we can
The
just,
minimum that the law requires is not always what is most protective of you.
good point, Yvonne.
There could be
Thank
best
you.
practices that you want to follow that are,
So maybe keep the waiver
Recommend.
just so that we have that, just so we're clear about that objection for now. I mean,
I
that's,
guess that would be up to
Mike.
the individual.
that's kind of a
midwife.
practical,
Mike
you know,
Nix.
question.
Add that to the FAQ.
Add that to the FAQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's going to be, it's going to
So
come
it's-
up.
It's not legally required or not required based on rules here, and this matches the language that's in the in the code. But as you go into if we are talking about administering an FAQ that's going to along with these changes, I think that's a good piece to add to that FAQ that says that is the minimal language. We advise, whatever language we do to say that
Yeah.
might be helpful.
And
Like, what's the best-
Destiny Hooper, I think it's still important to provide the waiver for a mom who doesn't know what it is and doesn't know what, so that's a way to give her informed consent.
Yeah, that's how we use it now. I mean, and even in my private practice, that's what I would do. I'd provide, information about it, and then, then the waiver was either signed or not. They'd either accept it or decline it. We can still use that. Okay, thank you.
Who's keeping a running list of the FAQs?
Who's doing that?
Mary Winston, TDLR. Yvonne, did you draft the last set, or RPM? We work all together, but
Okay.
RPM, I see you're making notes.
Okay.
And we will come back and check and.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in good hands.
Okay.
well, if there are any, no other questions or comments, it'd be appropriate to take a motion to recommend these rule changes for publication in the Texas Register.
Well, is there any more discussion? So I'll make that motion that we recommend that the proposed rules go to the public register. Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
All those in favor of passing the motion, please raise your right hand and say aye. Aye.
All right.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is an update on the informed consent form changes.
This item, Yvonne, is coming back up.
Don't get
I
comfortable.
was like, where's she going? She needed to change out her paper. Okay, so this is a very minor set of changes. These changes are already on the web. If you look at the second page of the form, there has been a change to move the malpractice insurance questions into a separate little box to separate them from the other questions. And the sentence about anyone can call 911 has been moved up. And the language there is clarified to not have I and you. The wording was a little confusing when somebody read through it.
So it's been pruned down a little bit, but there haven't been new requirements added. So this is really for clarity, and it did not go through a work group, it just went through internal review.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense.
So this is just kind of for information because it's already posted.
I have a question, Janet Dermeyer. It's probably redundant, but once again, was the whole question, the topic about malpractice in the law that we have to state this on an ICU? If not, why is it on here again? Remind me.
It's being added to provide the public, remember they're looking at this before they actually enter midwifery care. It's to be sure that they are clear about whether their midwife is carrying malpractice insurance before they enter midwifery care. So after the fact, they can't say, well, I assumed you had it. I thought you had it. I want to, collect on malpractice insurance.
But
This
it's
is-
not a law.
No, some of this language is specifically spelled out in the law, and some of this language is what appears to help provide informed consent to the public. So this language went through the advisory board at a previous meeting. Reorganizing it here did not add additional without your input.
Thank you for the clarification.
And this can always go back to work group for more work, although if we change it too often, midwives are going to get behind on it. And they're going to
I
be
don't think
using
most
it.
of them are behind this one to begin with, so.
Well, I've gotten feedback both ways. I've gotten some saying they really like it and some saying they don't.
During Mary Winston, TLR, during strategic planning, I did hear both ways.
Yeah.
I was in El Paso and McAllen and Austin, and I got feedback for different reasons both ways.
I think we just don't like this form in general.
Pretty much.
But
True.
it's what needs to be at this point.
Just Charlita Guillory. This form has to be filled out right now by every practicing midwife. Is that correct?
By the midwife and the client before the client enters midwifery care. It's for the prospective client.
One question, it says ensure all births and deaths are registered. It's for the baby's death or the maternal death?
This, I believe, refers to the baby's death, so if there were to be something unfortunate outside of hospital, the appropriate authorities would need to be contacted.
To follow up is that right now we're collecting all the maternal deaths in Texas. Do any of our records go to the people who are on that maternal state mortality review board to see, or is that just because it's in a hospital, they're gonna get it, or?
I
Most of
believe
the
they're pulling that data. We're not providing it in any way, so they're pulling it from the health department from birth certificates.
I don't believe we're allowed to legally declare death for the mom, are we?
I have no idea.
So you'd
I
have
don't think so.
911 and let them
Yeah.
declare.
But you
Yeah.
have
So it
insured
would be
that.
a record.
You have insured it.
Right.
Right.
It happens.
Brenda Buffington, I have a question about the administer a prescription drug unless I'm under the supervision of a licensed Texas physician. If a doctor writes standing orders for me, I don't think he is supervising me.
That wording comes out of the statute.
Mm-hmm. It's on my list, Brenda.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not even a change from the previous informed consent.
Yeah.
That language has been there forever.
Yeah.
Right.
And apparently, standing orders that are signed by a licensed Texas physician is enough. Whether you're under their supervision or not, those standing orders have almost always been accepted as appropriate for those medications that you have to
I
carry.
just like to see the word changed.
Yes, that would be nice. but-
It's a direct quote from the statute.
Mm.
It'll happen.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Appreciate that. All right, our next item on the agenda is the discussion of Midwife Education Summit. and topics for presentation.
Mary Winston, this is something we've talked about for quite a while, and we briefly discussed last time. It wasn't on the agenda. I think we came up with dates tentatively, but we needed input from you guys on what types of presentations we would, that would be good for this summit. I know there's an interest in enforcement, and there's a way that we can work on, we have very limited cases, but there's a way we can work some of that in. But we also want it to be just more than that. We want some topics that midwives are interested in, so this will be something that your body will attend. I know Vicki said she's done this sort of thing before, so I know I think she has some ideas, and hopefully some of the rest of you do. And because it's not coming tomorrow, if you don't have any ideas right now, you can always email us at advisory.boards and we can incorporate it. Tamala is leaving us. She is the summit planning person extraordinaire, but we will limp along with creating this agenda. She's really good about timing things out and all that, but I may steal her just for a little bit of this planning. But the guts of it are coming from, it's coming from the board. So topics, anyone?
I have some ideas.
Okay.
Yes.
Some of these are taken from just the various cases I've reviewed as an expert witness. And I think charting is so important. I just see some really bad charting. Especially with the EMRs, the electronic medical records. It's even worse with those. That whole conversation about anxiety, physiological versus psychological anxiety. I was thinking that maybe a discussion or a workshop on reaching out to doctors, hospitals, and EMS. I just added EMS given our conversation today, and how we can just keep building relationships and keep fostering a good, smooth transport for all midwives. Those were the first couple that came to my mind.
Okay, so, all right, that's good. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, so the target, Victoria Meinhardt, so their target audience is midwives and TDLR personnel, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we have work to do. I think that one of the things that I had wanted to talk about was, the rules and the rules changes, but I don't know if we're going to be able to do that because they're not going to be approved by then.
Possibly not.
This is Brad Bowman. It depends on the timing, but I'm anticipating that the comment period would be from mid-June to mid-July.
Ooh.
So, but then you have to have another advisory board meeting to come back and consider the rules again and the comments, and then it would have to go to a commission meeting. So it's going to be a process to get there. So it's probably going to be fall before those new rules are in effect.
Okay. It occurs to me, too, that one of the topics that might be important to discuss is this idea of these 97th percentile babies and what exactly we're looking for. Because Dr. Guillory has brought up, asymptomatic hypoglycemia is a real concern. Dr. Nix has brought it up as well. And, maybe it would be good to address that in a workshop. Like, okay, what does that really look like? What are you really looking for in those babies? Because midwife clients have some big old babies. I mean, we see them. We see big kids. Yeah. So it might be really useful.
It's interesting you should bring that up because I was trying to see what sort of topic some sort of way. I think the first 6 weeks of a neonatal life would be that sort of thing. We could talk about what things you would expect to happen during that time.
Okay.
That was just one. So whether it's morbidity, mortality, what happens in the first 6 weeks of life in asymptomatic healthy babies?
I'd love to have included in that if you could come, Dr. Guillory. talking about what some of the new recommendations are.
For neonates.
Yeah,
New.
yeah.
So we have our first presenter.
Yeah, I think everybody on
It's
this
the
board
babies.
could come
It's
up
for the
with a
babies.
topic and
It's
flesh
for
it
the
out,
babies.
honestly, and share our expertise. I think that would be really, really
There-
valuable.
There's one other thing. We're doing a lot right now in the state with postpartum depression. In a matter of fact, we're working with pediatricians that's coming up with the Texas Pediatric Society thing. We are having to determine how do you screen mothers. It's now coming to the pediatrician who will be doing the screening when the babies come back
Oh,
for that
Oh,
first
okay.
week or 2 weeks
Right.
checkup. So
Interesting.
there's a screening process, there's a quick screen
Mhm.
and a referral for
Yeah.
these mothers and babies. So I don't know how often you would even see that in your practice.
more often than I want. I have a
Really?
lot of clients who are they're like self-diagnosing that, they have anxiety. I have more clients than I ever have seen on antidepressants. A lot of women on antidepressants. And also due to just financial constraints, a lot of women that are going back to work way too early. And then we're dealing with really upset women at 6 weeks. And we have screening methods through the Edinburgh Postpartum Depression screen, and then also something called a PHQ-2, and then a PHQ-9, and then you also have the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Questionnaire. So we find ourselves administering this every 6-week client, and then also kind of moving on to that GAD questionnaire, because some of these women are carrying around a whole bunch of anxiety. So I'd love to address that, because it is, it can make an hour-long visit a 2-hour-long visit, because suddenly you're dealing with somebody who's really messy. And it's I'm seeing more of it than I ever saw before. And I don't know what's fueling it. I don't know if it's just general societal troubles, anxiety, but there's a lot of women suffering from anxiety now. It's more than I've ever seen. So yeah, I think we could address that. That would be really appropriate.
And maybe in that same vein, autoimmune disorders have become more common than ever
Yeah.
before. So maybe an overview.
And how to manage them, because a lot of those women do have a physician.
Yeah, they're often co-managed.
Yeah, they kind of have to be, or thyroid disorder, they have to, they've got to get them out there. Okay. And maybe what referral and co-management even looks like, especially what I'd love to hear from is not how that looks like in an urban area. Like here in Austin, I can refer to several physicians, but how does that look like in a rural area? What is that like when you have somebody who has a real medical condition who doesn't necessarily preclude them from having a out-of-hospital birth, but you really do need a physician involved in their management? And so how are rural midwives managing this in our current state where we have not enough OBs to go around? So I'm just real curious about that and what's happening out there.
Janet?
Janet Dermeyer. I had a couple of ideas too. I think risk assessment is always a good workshop.
Yeah.
Always, because again, in complaint review, that always seems to be the weak spot.
Mm-hmm.
And from y'all's perspective, we have a lot of conferences where we teach on education, but I think something that the state can offer to us is how do we change the law? If we went through the strategic planning meetings, and I thought it was great, actually, and really appreciated it. But we kind of want to know, if we don't like something, if we want to see a change, what is the process? What can you tell us on where to begin with that whole thing? And that's something y'all know, and we don't know. So it would be a good workshop for y'all to give to us. I agree with Lori, bridging the gap between midwives and working with the medical community. It starts with the EMTs, and how do we bridge that so that we can better improve those outcomes, because we've worked out the kinks and can expedite that better. We've talked before about the neonatal resuscitation classes. We've not really come back to solve that at all. It's still an issue and a problem. Legislation, I'd like to know a little bit more about legislation, how it works. I mean, really, because like I said, we've been told for many years that we can't open our rules except on legislative year. So clearly y'all could teach us some things about legislation. How does that really work? And what really are our options? I'd like to see one on legal waivers. You know, we talk about waivers, the eye ointments and that kind of thing, from a legal perspective.
Like how to write
How to write one, what can we really write one on? I mean, realistically, what does, just from a legal perspective, you know, I think it would be good. And then the antidepressant workshop would be, it is an ever-present thing in our society now, but I would like to know what are the side effects of those drugs. Again, it goes back to risk assessment. These women who are on some of these antidepressant medicines, I don't know if they're at a high risk to deliver at home. So it kind of all goes together. I can't talk without my hands, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have
Oh,
I
yes.
have one more idea. The U.S. MIRA, M-E-R-A, midwifery education, I wonder if we could get someone or one of us could do an overview of that. I think it would be helpful in guiding our board some.
And we're doing this all in one day?
Yes.
All right.
We actually, in Mary Winston, planned for meeting or summit, meeting, summit. Tamara, what do we normally do?
We have the summit scheduled for
August 6th.
meeting scheduled for August 6th.
Okay.
When we conduct summits here at the agency, we'll leave some wiggle room in the agenda to discuss at the meeting following some of the things that came up at the summit to further discuss.
Okay.
And the queen of timing these things is saying you can adjust the summit to a 2-day. We have a lot of topics and we're gonna have to narrow them down, kind of figure that out, and we will. Because we're gonna have to talk to the board to figure out who's best. At one point, we were trying to get a neonatal resuscitation person to come and speak at the meeting, and that didn't pan out earlier. I think she was having a baby. So that's something, but those contacts within your industry, we're gonna be reaching out to the board to get that.
Okay.
Mike Nix, is there any room for breakout sessions so that multiple different topics can be handled based on a person's desire to go to this thing versus that thing versus that thing?
We can
That
do
allows
that.
for more topics
I
to
keep
be
looking over
covered.
and she says, we can do that. So we can do that.
And can we get continuing education units for the midwives?
That I have to check on.
Okay, that would be,
Yeah, Carla James, TDLR, I will tell you that I don't think we have the capability to provide CEs.
ATM can though.
Yeah, you can, you can work with Janet Dermeyer, you can work with our association, and our association can.
As long as they host it. I think that has to be.
As long as
No.
what?
No, they don't have to host it. I already talked to Paula about this, and she says ATM will definitely provide the CEs. for
Okay,
this,
if somebody
so-
can get with us after the meeting so that we can get all of our
Let's not
ducks in
get
a row.
it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, you'll get a lot of midwives who show up. There's
Yeah,
CEUs
that'll
involved.
help.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will definitely increase good bribery.
It will absolutely increase the attendance, yeah.
Mary, I have one more.
Okay.
Maybe a discussion on critical congenital heart defect.
Oh, right, yeah.
I think we tried to get that one too, didn't we,
Yeah,
Laurie?
yeah, and then we decided that maybe a summit was the best.
Okay, yeah. Well, ladies, this will be, and Dr. Nix, this will be very different than our
Bless you.
air conditioner repair summit that we had.
Just a little.
Just a little bit.
All right, and of
No.
course, we'll
Feel
continue to
confident
discuss
about
this.
Thank you.
Anything else on the discussion of Midwife Education Summit? Of course, we will continue to discuss that. Thank you for the good input. All right, any agenda items requested for our next board meeting?
Janet Dermeyer. Mary, we talked about the neonatal resuscitation requirement. Is that something that needs to be put on the agenda item so that we can decide whether or not we want to expand on what is acceptable as criteria for our licensure?
Here's my hope, that because we have this included as a topic, we will get some more information before that meeting. This is something we kind of had lined up to discuss before, so I think we will be able to get someone to discuss that topic, and we'll find out something more. And we can put it on the agenda. Hopefully, we will have those questions answered during the summit before the advisory board meeting. But this is one of the things, this and the CCHD, we've tried to discuss before, and we wanted to get an educated discussion. And with the summit, I think we'll be able to get it. So.
Then I'd like to put that on the agenda.
Okay.
So that if it is covered in the summit to a place where, because there'll be some legal questions about how to change the rules so that we can use a new neonatal resuscitation training as part of our licensure.
Victoria Meinhardt, I think we had an education work group meeting at the very beginning where we did agree to allow that class integrative resuscitation of the newborn as a way to, I believe, renew the neonatal resuscitation requirement. Isn't that right, Yvonne? That we did that work. And I think we made.
I don't think so.
Charlotta was
This is
there.
Charlene Guillory.
You were
I
there.
was at that meeting.
Yeah.
And I think it came up.
Yeah.
But I thought that, and actually needed the minutes of that meeting so we could review it. But I thought it was going to be dependent on the representative giving us the modules that was being used. I have not ever seen the modules.
Right, we still need to see the modules.
I've never seen
Well,
that.
That's
Yeah.
correct. We
Yeah,
asked her for the complete curriculum.
And we never
She
did
didn't
that.
have it ready to give us at that
That's right.
point. She withdrew her request and said she would resubmit later, and we have not, to the best of my knowledge, received it.
Right.
Now,
But we had a preliminary, like, hey, we're willing to do this.
Exactly.
We're willing to accept it, but just show us the money, basically, and show us what you're doing.
And I
Yeah.
think there was another course that had been discussed also.
Okay.
That NARM accepts.
Right.
But that probably would be new rule language.
Right, and because we had even drafted some language that we could include in the rules once we had the information that we needed. So
Well, then
I
if we
think we're
put it
still
on the
waiting.
agenda, then some of us can pursue some of those other classes and look into it, correct?
She recanted that particular.
It sounds like we need information from
We
the
need,
courses before we can.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Oh, that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, if we
Yeah.
put it on the agenda, then we can present what we find at the next
If
meeting.
it-
If there, what's available out there. And then we can pursue it as far as the next meeting,
Mhm.
really looking at it.
okay.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Yvonne, I'm sorry, Charlita Guillory. We're talking about in the neonatal resuscitation. What about the adult resuscitation? I see you have to be certified. Is that changing? Are there any different requirements there?
Not that I'm aware of. We've been getting electronic cards. But most people, I think, are taking the healthcare providers' CPR and not having a problem finding it, not having to cover something that's inappropriate to midwives. I think that's the concern, is some of the techniques that are now required in the NNR course are not within a midwife's scope.
Right. But I don't know, but the one for adults are the same, it's the basic, it's not intubation and all of that, correct?
Right,
that's
That
right.
was the
No,
part.
it's,
Okay,
yeah, it's BLS for healthcare providers.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Yvonne, I just wanted to know if you'd stop. Just testing.
Quit harassing us.
I was just testing her.
All right. Thank you for those recommendations for.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Tamala has a suggestion.
Yes, Tamala.
So I'm suggesting that your current work group meeting is your current summit date is August 6th. With the number of topics that you have, your meeting was scheduled for the 7th. Would you guys like to book your meeting to the 8th and use a 2-day summit format?
We definitely have the potential to do that, I think.
So we'll block the first 3 days of August for the summit and meeting
Sixth,
dates.
seventh, and eighth, okay.
This is Charlita Guillory. Are you saying we're gonna have 3 completed days away from work? I'm just asking.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I'm
Dr.
thinking about
Guillory,
that too. I'm like,
As opposed to 2 maybe?
That's okay, I was thinking, is that 3 days of sitting in a chair?
Mary Winston, let us narrow this down a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
And we will poll the board. And also, we have to get commits for people to come and present. So, and I do understand that, and maybe not the 3 days, but let us narrow this down. We'll hold the first 2 days that we discussed, August 6th and 7th, and this may be Summit Part 1, I don't know. Because I don't know that we will be able to get to, actually I do. We will not be able to get to all of the subjects,
No.
but we can get to some of them, and this will be Part 1.
Victoria Meinhardt here. In my experience of putting together workshops like this, you're not going to get to it all. I mean, we just had a great brainstorming session on all the different topics that it would be really great to discuss. So now it's about, okay, who's going to be willing to do the workshops? You got to find the people. You got to figure out how long the workshops are going to be. You got to figure out where you're breaking for lunch. You got to get the PR done too. Right, all this stuff. So, and if you're leaving Tamala, clearly we have to have a conversation about who your successor is, and then who's doing the PR to get the word out, and how are we managing all that? Because that's a lot of the work of
Carla
it.
James, TDLR, that's not one person. That'll be a whole bunch of us.
Yeah,
So you
okay,
don't need to worry
great.
about that.
Okay. That's what I need to know. Is like, what do we need to worry about, and what do we
It wouldn't be a
not?
singular person regardless of whether or not Tamala was leaving, so.
Yes, I just have gotten used to Tamala.
Well, I feel, rest assured, I feel very strongly you'll get used to another fine
I
employee
know.
with TDLR.
I know.
And for
I hear
this,
that.
I'm just gonna be honest, I'm gonna ask her, because I know, summits that we've put on before, literally, oh, that'll take about an hour. Okay, we have to get 30 minutes for, I mean, she's done it so much. The timing of it, you all are doing the guts, but the timing of it, she has a lot of experience on, so
Yep.
we'll bend her ear on that.
Yeah, putting together when the workshop happens, how much of a break you give, when you,
Exactly.
yeah,
All
yeah,
that.
I've done that stuff too, so I'm.
Okay, good,
yeah, I'll-
thank you. We will be calling on you too.
Okay, that's fine. Call me.
All right. One other item that we need to loop back around to, was there any public comment? Do we have any public comments submitted or questions?
Public.
Yep.
No problem.
Okay. There's always the opportunity to do so. It sounds like we've already brought forth that discussion of the date, time, and location of the next board meeting that would be associated with that. Any further discussion on that agenda item? That is to be determined, but we're looking at that the week of August 6th, potentially the 8th, depending on the date. Any other items that we need to discuss? Anything else? All right. Thank you again for being here in support of Texas Midwives and their consumers. We are adjourned.